Welcome to Capital Gains. Yahoo Finance used a unique look at how U.S. government policy will affect your bottom line. It's been a busy week as President-elect Trump has been making his cabinet picks. We've been eyeing who he's going to be picking for Treasury Secretary and, of course, Commerce Department as well. And, of course, keeping an eye on DOGE, not the coin, but the non-governmental advisory agency that's Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk doing some cost-cutting to the federal budget. We're going to get into lots of that later on. We're also going to be joined later on by Whalen, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors. I'm Rachelle Akuffo. Have to, of course, introduce my co-stars Ben Werschkul and Rick Newman. So, Ben, what is on your note cards for this week?
So I'll kick us off with DOGE today. So we'll talk about the cabinet officials later, but DOGE, of course, is the Department of Government Efficiency. So that's my note card for today. And I picked it because we kind of learned some details about what this effort, which is outside of government, and there's a lot of questions around it, is going to look like. There's three words I'd sort of associate with it that might help people understand it. The first one is hyperbolic. Musk has talked about cutting at least $2 trillion out of the federal budget. That's really difficult, as we've discussed a lot of times. He talked this week about deleting as many agencies as possible. That's a big task, and that they're clearly going to continue that. The second one is unilateral, which is that this is kind of a recognition that the kind of Washington establishment is going to put its imprint on Trump's agenda overall. And what you saw from Musk and Ramaswamy this week was basically a plan to kind of go around Congress and do it all on their own. And then the third tied to that is strategic, which is essentially, we saw a Wall Street Journal op-ed this week that was basically, here's all the ways we're going to get around Congress. I have a story for this weekend on the concept of impoundment, which you're going to hear a lot more about, which is basically what happens when the president decides he's not going to spend the money that Congress wants to spend. Though Congress appropriates it, the president can, or in Trump's view, cannot spend it. There's a lot of other things like that, like mass firings to get around civil service protections and all these things. So a lot of it is up in the air, and then there's a lot of politics around it too, which Rick, I know you've written a lot about this week.
I wonder if we should have a Department of Yahoo efficiency. We could maybe digitize your index cards there, Ben, and we wouldn't have to pay for paper and ink. This is going to be so much fun. Watching what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have in mind here. I think they are massively overplaying their hand already. Is this what voters said they wanted Donald Trump to do? I don't think so. So first of all, it looks as if Donald Trump is good. When the popular vote is the final tally is in, he may not even get 50%. He may get like 49.8 or 49.9%. That is not the mandate that these guys are acting like they have. And then when you look at, we're now getting some good polls of why voters voted the way they did. And most of them are almost nobody said we want somebody to go in there and completely tear up the federal government the same way Elon Musk seems to have done with Twitter. I mean, they said we want prices to come down and we want somebody to fix immigration. That's it. That's why people voted for Donald Trump. In that Wall Street Journal op-ed these two guys wrote, they said the American people called for sweeping change. Actually, they didn't. The American people did not call for sweeping change. So what's going to happen here is almost all these things they say they want to do should require Congress. I mean, you can't change funding. You can't just cancel funding or redirect funding to something else without Congress saying so. So these guys think they've found these end arounds through this 1974 law and other methods. This is going to get litigated immediately. As soon as they try to do something, it's going to get litigated. And I'd be astonished if Congress doesn't assert itself. Even a Republican-controlled Congress wants to preserve congressional authority here. So this is going to be a huge battle from the very beginning.
And it's interesting because when you look at some of the places that they said they want to cut, some of the most bloated areas, according to them, some of this zombie spending, top of the list overwhelmingly was regarding veterans' health. I'm sure that's going to go down like a ton of bricks. But do we know yet just how much influence they'll have?
Yeah, exactly. It's like I can't think of three words that are more sort of politically untouchable than veterans' health care. So
Medicare is one of them. That's where a lot of the other money is, and Social Security anyway.
Exactly. And so it sort of points to their challenge here of actually kind of going into the details. One thing I'll add to is that I do think there's kind of an off-ramp in the sense of what DOGE could be, when it reaches its expiration in 18 months, which is essentially regulation cutting. That is what, when you listen to Elon Musk, what he talks most passionately about, it sort of not incidentally is the one that most directly impacts his business. It's what that Wall Street Journal op-ed started with, and it's what Trump was going to do anyway, which is cut red tape like crazy, which the president has a lot of authority to do as well. So, like we're saying, like a lot of these big numbers may never come to be, but I do think the regulation is a way for them to do it. Maybe this will age badly, and maybe they'll do more, but they can cut a lot of red tape and then declare victory that way.
Well, it's already starting to feel to me like a lost opportunity, and of course, we're the naysayers in the press, so maybe they'll prove us wrong. But look, the federal government is bloated. And one of the things that the government is famous for is new Congresses come in and new presidents come in and they enact new policies, new regulations. Nobody ever gets rid of the old stuff, and without a doubt, we need to get rid of that old stuff. So there is an opportunity here, but they're stepping on their own feet by going after too much. So maybe they will try to cut all these departments that are never going to be able to get cut because Congress are going to say no. But then below the surface, they will actually find some of the waste. And by the way, there have been millions of waste, fraud, and abuse commissions that say you could do this. You can't lop off like one thing and say, oh, we just saved $300 billion. It's $1 billion here, $1 billion there. It is incremental changes across the board is probably the way you make the government more efficient, but these guys don't seem to have the patience for that.
And as we were saying, it does depend on just how much of the advice that the Trump administration plans on taking. I mean, Vivek and Elon, they really painted themselves as volunteers, sort of doing their part. Very rich volunteers already, so like they need the money. But it'll be interesting to see if the average American is connecting with a lot of the things and the cuts that they're trying to make, especially a lot of these federal employees. I do want to make sure that we get to some of the cabinet picks as well. Ben, if you want to kick that off for us.
Sure thing. So as of this taping, the one we know for certain is Commerce Secretary, and that's Howard Lutnick, who was in the running for Treasury, but now is going to be heading up Commerce. And the position he seems to have is almost like a trade and tariff czar. Trump, in his announcement, talked about him as the overseer of that, with oversight of the U.S. Trade Representative, which is a separate part of government. So Lutnick is going to be at the center of tariff talk, which is going to be dominant for a lot of the economic observers of Trump's first year. One interesting development this morning is that Capital Economics is projecting a 30% tariff on China and sort of more strategic tariffs on places like South Korea as a way to kick things off, which would be a significant downgrade for Trump from what he promised on the trail, a smaller thing. So that could be, the question is whether it's a sort of Trump 2.0, what we saw last time, or it's a whole different thing, which is the across-the-board tariffs he promised for sure. And then there's a lot of other pieces, a lot of musical chairs that are sort of set to fall that'll play in a lot of this as well.
Well, I mean, this is what I think is going to happen with the Musk Commission. So, Ben, every time somebody has the idea, we should just cut some cabinet agencies in toto. Isn't the Commerce Department usually one of
on there? Yeah.
So what did Rick Perry want to cut? And this is not just like Rick Perry's the first guy. This is sort of like conservative orthodoxy, which is if you want to cut the government, you cut the Education Department, right? The Commerce Department, because nobody really, it just kind of promotes. I mean, it does. All these agencies do a lot, but I mean, the Commerce Department.
And in a good example of that, Rick Perry's third agency was the Department of Energy, which he ended up heading, which still exists. So it tells you how hard it is to cut these things.
And Rick Perry also said after he became Secretary of Energy of the department he wanted to cut, he said, "Wow, it turns out this agency actually does some important things. We shouldn't cut it. I've actually changed my mind about that." So I think could happen here is Musk's commission is going to say, kill the Commerce Department, kill education. And by the way, I'm only learning all this as we go along here. The Education Department has a huge budget, but it only employs like 5,000 people. The discrepancy there is it administers student loans. So it has and funding, different types of funding for state and local. So I don't know. We'll see. We still don't have a Treasury Secretary. A week ago, we talked in depth about who that person might be, and it could happen any minute, I guess. But the problem seems to be that they can't find a credible person markets will respect who also supports Trump's tariffs. that kind of tells you something, doesn't it?
Right.
So I guess they're going to get somebody who will sort of, look the other way while Trump imposes his tariffs. But if they get you can't put a quack in charge of the Treasury Department. That is one of the few departments, and I would say Defense Department and CIA also, or National Intelligence. You just really cannot put quacks in those positions because you will get an adverse reaction in markets. So they have to put a real person there, and they haven't so far.
But it does seem to be that obviously Trump is putting a lot of his loyalists in these spaces. I'm not sure how concerned he is about what markets will do. I think maybe he thinks perhaps that some of the corporate tax cuts will offset some of the damage there and the good faith there. But we'll have to see. Obviously, some very interesting picks. Some people obviously put in positions of departments that they can't seem to stand, frankly. So we'll see how that pans out. We'll put a pin in it for now, but we will be back with our guests. Stay with us on Capital Gains. Welcome back to Capital Gains. We're joined now by our guest, Chris Whalen, chairman of Whalen Global Advisors. Welcome to Capital Gains, Chris. So obviously, we're still waiting for a Treasury Secretary pick at the moment. How telling is it that at least this does seem to be a position that the Trump transition team is taking a bit more time with?
Well, I think in general, you're going to see a much more deliberate process from President Trump than the first time around. First time around, he didn't expect to win. And they hadn't even thought about appointments. They had to start from a completely dead stop. So this time around, I think they know what they want to do. But finding a credible Treasury Secretary that's willing to get up and talk about tariffs is a fairly big ask. Tariffs were high in this country for decades before the Great Depression, but the academic community, the Democrats who were always against tariffs, have kind of turned it into a mythology that said, oh my God, the tariffs of the Great Depression are what made things worse. So they have to somehow surmount that in the intellectual community with the media and everybody else, and then they can move forward. But Treasury is the most important position in the government.
Yeah,
I think Steve Mnuchin made that very clear after Charlottesville. He was the glue that held the administration together, and that's why it's such an important appointment.
Hey, Chris, you wrote a very provocative piece you sent around in your newsletter earlier this week talking about the rising risk of U.S. government default and looking at credit default swaps as an indicator there, and saying that basically saying Donald Trump and his whole team, they're going to run into this problem right away. Really? Do you foresee the actual possibility of a U.S. government default within the next 4 years?
What I think is going to happen is the Fed is going to be forced to give up on the battle with inflation, and they're going to have to reduce short-term rates. The Treasury is funding everything in T-bills. This is one of the big mistakes that Janet Yellen has made over the past 4 years. They have not termed out any of their debt, even during COVID. That was a great opportunity to finance an awful lot of the debt and government spending at zero rates. And instead, we're sitting here today with T-bill rates much higher than they were, and interest expenses galloping faster than anything else in the federal budget. So unless we can cut an awful lot of spending and get the Fed to reduce rates, I think the budget becomes a problem. And it will be very apparent to the rest of the world. If you think about the Depression, that whole period, the Fed was buying pretty much all of the Treasury issuance. And I think we're headed back there.
What does that mean for the indicators ordinary people see? For example, long-term interest rates, which affect mortgages, car loans, and stuff like that. We're already seeing long-term rates higher than a lot of people think they would otherwise be without all this debt. What's going to happen there?
Short-term rates will come down. So this will help the dealer community. This will help new issues in terms of the bond market. But long-term rates for mortgages, I think, will be higher. That's what I told my colleagues yesterday in the mortgage world. They think that we're going to get back down to 4s and 5s for residential mortgages. I think that's not going to happen. And remember, we're not going to see any kind of refinance activity in the U.S. unless you get 30-year mortgage rates below 5. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So what I foresee happening is that the Treasury is going to essentially force the Fed to help them finance the deficit. And, all of that will be on the short side. It'll be inside of 1 year. You saw what happened with the 20-year auction the other day. It went very badly. And then I think long-term rates could be higher. We could have 8% mortgage rates in this country by the middle of next year.
And what does that mean, Chris, for the tax debate we're coming next year? You said this is going to be apparent to the world. It's going to be apparent to the markets. Will it be apparent to Washington, who's sort of with Republicans really keen on big tax cuts next year that could sort of make this problem that you're talking about worse?
Yes, I think so. And one of the things I've heard repeatedly from my friends in Washington who are working on the transition, I'm a Republican, I work for Jack Kemp, is that Trump may not get a chance to do what he wants to do. The fiscal situation that Joe Biden is handing to President Trump is a mess. And this really ultimately falls to Janet Yellen. She has done nothing to exercise leadership, to talk to Congress about deficits. They won't even use that word deficit in the Biden administration. I don't think Kamala Harris said that word once during the presidential campaign. But it is going to determine policy, because when the numbers get this big, your choices start to be fewer and fewer. And that's my big concern. I think the Fed ultimately is going to have to monetize parts of the federal debt. And when we start doing that, I think it'll be reflected in the dollar.
And Chris, I want to talk about some of the, at least, solutions or options that have been thrown out there. Of course, Senator Lum is a big proponent of crypto, encouraging the Treasury to buy Bitcoin and not gold. And I know you had some choice words about that. Walk us through the thinking about what you think the Treasury should be buying and selling.
Well, we're in the opposite situation that Franklin Roosevelt faced in 1933. In 1933, they were trying to get inflation up. We had deflation. Today, we have inflation. That's why Bitcoin is at $100,000. Bitcoin is the best indication of inflation you could possibly have. So how do you deal with this? Treasury should be buying gold, and Treasury should be selling credit default swaps. Credit default swaps for the United States are trading at 40 basis points. That's twice Berkshire Hathaway. Okay? When you start seeing corporates trading inside the United States in the credit markets, that's a problem. And I think that ultimately we're going to have to respond to that. How do you respond? You buy gold and start pushing the gold price up to where it should be, which is much higher than the current levels. And you also say to the world, fine, we have some credit problems, but we're going to make a market in our own credit. Why not? Right? I think we should push that credit default swap spread back down to 10 basis points. And, unfortunately, nobody on Capitol Hill understands finance, very few people. So, they look at the Bitcoin price and say, oh, she'd own some Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is the problem. It's not the solution.
Hey, Chris, in the article that caught my attention earlier this week, you said something to the effect, for those of us who traded Trump casino bonds back in the day, I didn't. Tell us what happened, a short version of what happened with Trump casino bonds.
Well, they went bankrupt. So the bonds were in distress, and they traded at distress levels for a long time. I was at Bear Stearns at the time, so it was quite a situation. There's a wonderful Netflix series about President Trump that really people need to look at. They have some old TV clips in there that I had totally forgotten about, like Donald Trump with Rona Barrett. Things have changed an awful lot in American politics. You guys were alluding to that before in your conversation. But, some things haven't changed. And the tendency of the United States to ignore fiscal issues and to not want to pay taxes on all the rest, I think at some point we're going to have to get serious about how we govern this country and how we finance it. Ultimately, I think you're going to see a national sales tax.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's what you think of the outcome of this? Is a national sales? Is it a literal sales tax, or is it sort of through tariffs, or is it how does that work in your?
Well, it's a VAT. It's a VAT, right?
It's a VAT. I think you would push down the individual tax rates and only have a punitive tax for billionaires. The middle class pays for this country. You could take all the money from the billionaires and it would run the government for a couple of months. And then what would you do, right? So it's middle class and lower income families who actually pay the bills in this country through a variety of means, sales tax, etc. That's where the money is. So to me, you want to get away from the socialist fixation on income tax, which comes, obviously from Franklin Roosevelt, and go to something that's consumption based and that's going to grow rapidly. And to me, that's a national debt.
Oh.
So
is that
Chris, how
possible?
confident are you based on?
Oh,
I was
oh,
going to
I'm
say,
just
how
gonna-
confident are you that they could deliver on this, and that is the actual mandate that the American people voted for?
Well, I'll tell you what the American people don't want. They don't want to see their government default. They don't want to see the old people out in the street because we can't take care of them anymore. So that's really the issue. We don't have yet, I think, political figures that are willing to get up and talk about this. They're all still hiding from this issue. Talking about tax cuts? No. We need to be raising revenue in this country. You know, I work for Fritz Hollings in addition to Jack Kemp. Fritz understood this. He was a classical liberal Democrat who was governor of South Carolina, but he understood revenue and he understood that you have to pay your bills. So to me, it's obvious. The question is, when are we going to sober up as a country and get serious so that we can protect all the things that we built over the last couple of centuries? You know, I'm working on my reissue of my first book for next year. And it's striking, if you go from Lincoln to today, we've built this country on paper money that's not convertible into anything. How do you start to defend that and not have us go into a world of Bitcoin? You start to pay your bills, and you also want to start buying gold again, because that to me is the most striking change you could make that will say to people, this is where value is. I'd like to see the U.S. Treasury issue gold coins based on weight, not based on monetary value. And then every day people would see the Treasury price for gold and they would know where inflation is. Okay? Inflation is the issue that nobody wants to talk about. And it's why, frankly, President Trump won the election at the end of the day.
It's true. And unfortunately, some of the unpopular things that require, you know, inflation to come down, people don't want to step up and do. Appreciate you taking the time to join us. Chris Whalen, thank you for joining us on Capital Gains.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, so before we sign off for this episode, of course, got to get back up to speed to see the progress on Rick's Trump trade. Rick, how's it going?
Well, I lost my Trump trade, but it's okay. So just to remind people, I decided to get in on this action, and so I could write about it and tell everybody what's going on. So about a week before the election, I bought a put option for 100 shares of Trump's company, ticker symbol DJT. And the deal with that was if the price fell to $25 or less, by the time my contract expired, well, I would be in the money, and I would be able to make some money if it went down below 21, 20, 15. If it hit 10, I would make a good little pot of money. Well, it didn't. The contract expired November 15th, and the price around then was $27, $28. So I spent $390 on that contract, which I lost. But a couple of interesting things. First of all, what a lot of people who were betting on Trump winning thought was going to happen is that shares of that stock would skyrocket when he won. And that, very interestingly, did not happen. In fact, the opposite happened. The stock came down. It was about $40 before the election when I bought it. It had been at $50 a week before that, and it now is only at $30. So the stock has come down. So it's kind of like the hopes for a big bang in this stock have just not materialized, and people are like, wow, this really is a crappy company, which it is. It barely has any revenue. And as for me, I'm not starting a GoFundMe or anything like that, because I also own a little bit of crypto, and gains in crypto have more than offset what I lost on my Trump trade on DJT. Who knows? This is vapor money, so this could all disappear any minute. But for now, I'm up if you put it all together.
Still coming up in the green there. Thank you for breaking that down for us. Always great to have Rick and Ben with us. And of course, a big thank you to Chris Whalen as well. That does it for this episode of Capital Gains. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.